Welcome to the Alaska Weather Show. I'm meteorologist Peter Chan, coming to you from the National Weather Service on behalf of a special partnership with Alaska Public Media. It is Thursday, May 26, 2022, and we're leading up now to the long Memorial Day weekend. If you have any particular questions or if you note an interesting observation or wish to share a photo, you can reach me at peter.chan@noaa.gov. And if you'd like additional weather information, climate information on top of what I provide, you can go to weather.gov. It's an online point-and-click map of the continental U.S. with Alaska and Hawaii to the lower left. It allows you to look for forecast, watches, warnings, advisories, and all sorts of other information for pretty much anywhere in the country or U.S. territories. And it gives you a chance to check up the weather on where various friends and family may live. Quick looking at the map this Thursday afternoon. We do have some severe weather in the western Carolinas. There have been some severe thunderstorm warnings, even a couple of tornado warnings. Also some flash flooding there in the lower end of the Appalachians. And then out toward the west, we have fire weather watches covering much of New Mexico and northern half there of Nevada. We have red flag warnings, southern Nevada, northwest areas of Arizona on through southern Utah and into southwest Colorado. Here in Alaska, though, there's not much change in what I was telling you yesterday. A warm ridge of high pressure will continue to build from off the Bering into southwest and then south central Alaska as we go through the long holiday weekend. This is going to result in some very warm temperatures, dry conditions. Very high fire danger will exist along with high river levels across a good portion of the state here this holiday weekend. Red flag warnings are currently in effect for central and east central areas through 10 p.m. this Thursday evening. And then other red flag warnings will go into effect for tomorrow for much of the southwest, west arm of the Alaska Range, right up on through the Mat-Su Valley. So I'll have the details coming up in just a moment, but the main thing is avoid the use of fire in any of these red flag warning areas. And certainly, if you're going to be out camping, recreating this weekend, try to avoid any activities that might cause a spark. Make sure you check your chains on any vehicles you're towing to make sure they're not dragging there along the pavement and could start a spark. Don't shoot bullets against rocky areas. Ricochets can start fires. I've seen that in my time spent in the interior west down in Nevada. Flood advisories continue on the Anoka and Gulkana rivers. We continue to see snowmelt flooding being a problem here. Still, many of the higher elevations continue to melt off record snowpack from a very snowy winter. A check of the Alaska River breakup map shows essentially all of the river systems, especially the Yukon southward, are pretty much open except for the highest elevations coming out of some of the mountains here in southern parts of the state. We had on the Anoka River a backup of floodwaters that happened because well over a week ago there was an ice jam on the lower Yukon River near Grayling. The floodwaters backed up above that ice jam, came up, backed up through the Anoka River, and then caused the lowlands surrounding the Anoka River to flood. And as a result, this is going to be a slow process for those floodwaters to drain out of the Anoka River system. Also, the Gulkana River has seen and is expecting some higher water levels as the snow melt-off will accelerate given the warmer temperatures we have here coming up for the holiday weekend. If you didn't see yesterday, this is a shot from Tuesday from Shagaluk Village, and the airport there, the runway around it is flooded. So here's an approach from a shot there taken from a plane, and then having to taxi people by boat there at the end of the runway to get into the village. And again, we have a flood advisory continuing there through at least Saturday. And if conditions don't improve, it could be extended beyond that. And the Gulkana River will continue to see a flood advisory now through into early June, through at least June 2nd. We don't anticipate water levels to be coming down there. Now this evening, we have Red flag warnings in effect for central and eastern parts of the state north of the Alaska Range, including Galena, areas like Tanana through Fairbanks, Fort Yukon, as well as Delta Junction. And mainly because of the warm temperatures and breezy conditions that have developed along a thermal trough this Thursday afternoon. This red flag warning is in effect until 10 o'clock this Thursday evening. But as we go further south on Friday, we have red flag warnings now in effect from noon till 10 p.m. Friday for much of southwest Alaska along the Alaska Range. And then coming up along Cook Inlet there, west side of the Kenai, including the Anchorage Bowl, and then on up through the Mat-Su Valley up past Talkeetna. Very high fire danger because this time of year the grasses have cured. They're very dry. We have this upper level ridge building in, providing warm, very warm temperatures in the 70s. I won't rule out somebody hitting 80 degrees over this weekend, giving the setup. And here is the fire danger. We're looking at the grass, and the grass is where they have dried out. And you see areas of orange, which are very high, much of the Yukon Valley and to the north and west side of the Alaska Range. We have areas of red, extreme fire danger there just west of the Alaska Range, north and west of Lake Iliamna, as well as surrounding Cook Inlet, areas of the western Kenai, on up toward the lower Mat-Su Valley. So be extremely cautious. Avoid burning in these areas, especially this weekend, because it's just not worth starting a fire. What could happen with that spreading, given these conditions? Looking at the satellite imagery, we do have some increasing cloud cover and chance of a few showers popping up there along areas of the Alaska Range and along the Alcan border up toward the Arctic North. Also, some low cloudiness there through the northwest along the North Slope, and then rather dense low clouds and fog along the west coast. We do anticipate some dense fog to be redeveloping tonight into early on Friday morning along areas of the west coast. As the upper level ridge, though, builds eastward across the southwest mainland into south central areas, we have generally clear skies, and that's going to allow for some very warm temperatures shaping up here for the weekend. Here is that high pressure today, centered over, at least surface high, centered over the central bearing. You can see the thermal trough there up through the central interior with a little cold front working its way there along the Arctic coast, and then another extension of that bearing high into the southwest areas of the Gulf and North Pacific. For tonight, we anticipate that high will remain in place. That's just going to keep the fog going along the west coast. And then by the time we get into Friday, the interior southwest and even along and especially up through the Mat-Su Valley, we'll see plenty of sunshine, temperatures warming above 70. There could be an isolated thunder storm pop up with some of the cumulus buildups in the Yukon and along the Alcan border. Further north, there could be a few flurries and lower clouds along the Arctic coast, but as I mentioned, there definitely be fog and low clouds along the west coast, especially early in the day. And into Saturday, not much change. The upper level high does build further eastward across the southwest into south central areas, and that's just going to serve to warm the temperatures. We don't expect as breezy of conditions here by Saturday or Sunday afternoons. That will help lower the wildfire risk just a little bit, but still very warm temperatures and dry conditions are going to keep fire danger very high across southern parts of the state. Low temperatures Friday morning will generally be above 40 degrees across the Panhandle, as well as much of the south central areas, including the coast and interior. Temperatures Friday afternoon are going to warm near 70, Haines, Skagway, still 50s though, southern parts of the Panhandle. Should easily get up into the low 70s around Anchorage, 75 or a bit better there at Talkeetna, 60s elsewhere along the coast. And then Saturday morning lows will bump up by a few degrees, 40s to near 50, very mild. And then Saturday even warmer. Those temperatures may even be understated by a few degrees, especially surrounding Cook Inlet and on the west side of the Alaska Range. Looking in the far north, below freezing, North Slope and along the Arctic coast, 20s to near freezing. Otherwise, 30s and lower 40s through the Yukon Valley. Temperatures Friday afternoon will get back up around or just above 70 there, middle Yukon, including Fairbanks. And then as we go into Saturday morning, still temperatures dipping near or below freezing, western Seward Peninsula on and through the North Slope. And then on Saturday, we'll see temperatures bump up by a few degrees there. North side of the Alaska Range, the usual warm spots, including Tanana on over toward Fairbanks and McGrath. Further south and west, we see lows tonight, 30s to near 40 degrees most areas. Temperatures will warm on the west side of the Alaska Range into the lower 70s with 60s, though some 40s, cooler readings lower Yukon Delta, and Saturday morning lows generally 30s to lower 40s, warmest readings along the Alaska Range, and then back up Saturday afternoon, 60s and some 70s on the west side of the Alaska Range. Looking ahead here to extended temperature forecast early June, June 1st through June 5th by the Climate Prediction Center of the Weather Service. Look at that. Good chance of above to much above normal temperatures over southwest and south central Alaska, centered on Bethel, Dillingham, and Anchorage, which would mean a continuation of these very warm temperatures and generally near normal to even a bit below normal precipitation there through the Panhandle. Just a slight chance of a little above normal precipitation there up along the North Slope and Arctic coast. So everyone get ready for a very pleasant and warm Memorial Day weekend, especially across southern halves of the state, and certainly be extremely cautious with any use of fire.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Well, it's now time for your aviation weather heading into the Memorial Day weekend. And on Friday, well, the big weather story will be the area of high pressure, mid and upper levels, and extends to the surface, extending from the central eastern Bering across the southwest mainland, and it will continue to build eastward across south central areas as we go through the long Memorial Day weekend. But we do expect extensive IFR conditions across areas of the Gulf once you get out into the open waters, as well as along the west coast from just off the Yukon Delta on up through the Bering Strait and across much of the northwest and north slopes. And as we go into Friday afternoon, we can continue to see those areas of IFR along the northwest side of the state, down along the western Seward Peninsula, Norton Sound, and southwest coast, as well as out over the open waters of the Gulf. There could even be some cumulus buildups and perhaps an isolated thunderstorm pop-up along the Alcan border in the upper Tanana Valley Friday afternoon. For Saturday morning, still widespread IFR conditions across much of the northwest North Slope down through the Seward Peninsula and into the lower Yukon Delta. Also out over the open waters of the Gulf and into the southern portion of the Panhandle. Saturday afternoon, we see, though, inland areas, a lot of VFR conditions through the Yukon Valley, Alaska Range, southwest. It's going to be a very warm weekend. Temperatures will be in the 70s in many locations there across southwest and south central Alaska. Looking at past conditions Friday, VFR conditions are anticipated at Anatovik and Adigan. Further north and west, though, as you go up through the North Slope, expect to run into IFR conditions. And then Lake Clark and Merrill will see VFR conditions there along the west side of the Alaska Range. And rounding up through central areas, rainy and windy passes, will see VFR conditions as well during the day on Friday. Further east, Isabel will see VFR conditions, as will Mentasta. But as I mentioned, as you fly northeast of Mentasta Pass toward the Alcan border, the upper Tanana Valley, there may be some cumulus buildups and perhaps an isolated thunderstorm pop-up there with maximum daytime heating. For Tanita Pass, VFR conditions Friday, as well as Portage Pass, and it looks like there in the northern end of the Panhandle at Chilkoot and White should also manage to hold on to VFR conditions, though we do anticipate some showers to impact areas of the far southern part of the Panhandle. Freezing levels have come up in response above 6,000 feet across much of the mainland, including much of the Yukon Valley. Alaska Range as the result of this mid-upper level high pressure ridge building from the central Bering eastward across the southwest and south central areas of the state as we go through the weekend. Coldest air is up there along, as we'd expect this time of year, along the Arctic coast. And we don't expect any widespread areas of significant icing. There might be a little considerable moderate icing in some pockets up there along the spine of the Brooks Range and especially the western half of the North Slope, northwest Arctic coast. And then looking at the jet stream level winds, the dominant feature at the upper levels is the high that's going to be centered there around the YK Delta region. That's at 30,000 feet. This feature, though, extends downward through the mid-levels, 9,000 feet, 700 millibars. We see that high center near Nunavik Island. A couple of low pressures flanking it well to the east-south there of Haida Gwaii, as well as along the Kamchatka coast there, way over toward the far western end of the Bering. We do see some winds upwards to 30, 40 knots along areas of the eastern Arctic coast there near the Alcan border up toward Dead Horse and Kaktovik. And then 3,000 foot level, we have weak low pressure there between Haida and Vancouver, with some winds maybe upwards to 35 knots there along the British Columbia coast. Otherwise, the mainland, relatively light winds. Doesn't mean there couldn't be some breezy conditions due to daytime mixing, because that's actually going to enhance the fire danger across much of the southern half of the state, along and south of the Yukon River here as we go through Friday and Saturday. There are going to be red flag warnings in effect, so keep that in mind with any activity that could cause a spark and potentially trigger a fire. Otherwise, at 3,000 feet, we have kind of a dual high center there out over the central Bering that extends to the surface. But with all that said, at this time, we do not expect any areas of significant turbulence here during the day on Friday, though there could be some localized breezier conditions there in through areas of the Yukon Valley and along the western Alaska Range in response to the warmer temperatures.
Hey there, Star Spotters. There's a bunch of heroes in the night sky, but only one that puts the glad in gladiator, and that's Hercules. To find Phil's boy, all you need to do is hit the darkness after 10 p.m. and look east. First, you'll want to find bright blue Vega, and from here you'll have to look hard because Herc's strong, but not very bright. Up and to the right of Vega is a box of 4 stars called the Keystone. That's Hercules' body. Let's put the graphic up so you can see him. There we go. Herc's head is Razzle-Gathie, which is pretty dim, but he's face-to-face with another constellation, Ophiuchus, the 13th zodiac constellation. Ophis' head, Razzle-Hague, is much easier to find. Thanks to producer Sergio, we can show you what to look for, but if you want to go from zero to hero, you'll have to find a nice dark patch and find it for real. It'll help you find Lyra next week, too. Keep looking up.
Welcome back to another edition of Alaska Weather Facts. I'm meteorologist Dave Snyder, and we have a special guest in the studio today. We welcome Amanda Terborg of the Aviation Weather Center. Thanks for joining us, Amanda.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Amanda's flown in all the way from Kansas City, and for those of you that don't know, the Aviation Weather Center serves the lower 48 for aviators, just as the Alaska Aviation Weather Unit here in Anchorage serves all of Alaska. So I kind of wonder, what's the Aviation Weather Center in Kansas City doing to help out Alaska, Amanda?
Yeah, you know, we do a lot of collaboration work with our sister station up here. Lately, we've been doing a lot of work, especially in the satellite meteorology.
Okay.
In particular, we have been looking at ways to better identify icing conditions in clouds, which is a big deal up here because, as I'm coming to find out, even though I'm not from here, you guys have a lot of pilots here.
We have a lot of pilots. In fact, it's, when you say you can't get there from here, that's how you get there.
Yeah.
Very good. Okay, so with icing potential then, what's Kansas City working on?
Well, we are working on something that will help us, again, identify the icing in the clouds. You don't want ice on your aircraft.
No.
Not only does it add a whole bunch of extra weight to your airframe when it attaches to the wings and the nose cone, but it can also mess with your aerodynamics.
Right.
And in the most serious conditions, that can mess with it enough that you can actually crash.
It changes the shape of the wing, and that makes it sometimes impossible to fly, right?
It does, yeah. So we want to figure out a way to better forecast for that.
Makes sense.
Now this particular image is over Alaska. The colors here are a little goofy. It doesn't look like your run-of-the-mill satellite image.
Okay.
But the red is where you have liquid clouds and the blue is ice. But again, it really doesn't tell you a lot where you have icing conditions in that cloud. Because in those clouds there's little droplets and they're cold and they're actually below freezing, but they're still liquid. And that makes them sticky.
Okay.
So when an aircraft flies through there, those droplets are sticking to the aircraft and it can happen amazingly fast.
Right.
And so that's what we're trying to find. And there is a product called the Aircraft Flight Icing Threat that does this. And it's basically looking at the temperature of the cloud, and it's also looking at the size of the droplets to identify a probability and intensity of those icing conditions.
Okay.
And if you flip to the next image, this is a case from Juneau, Alaska, where this probably wouldn't have been the best day to fly around Juneau.
Okay.
Now there was an area of moisture that pushed south from the southwest up along the coast that pushed in a stratus layer. And in the stratus layer, there was a lot of those super cooled liquid drops, or a lot of stickiness.
Okay.
And so the flight icing threat was able to, in the pinks and the reds there, was able to identify where that icing was. Now this is really cool. You know, it's really cool to be able to identify that. There is, you know, of course, caveats to every product. Much as we wish it would happen, sun doesn't shine all the time, unless, I guess, if you live in northern Alaska during the summertime.
Right.
But we need that sun to be able to bounce off those clouds and to be able to see where those super cool drops are.
Okay, so it's a daytime only tool.
It is, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, right now, of course, you know, we're in the era of advanced satellite technology, and there is a satellite that can actually use moonlight to see clouds.
Yes.
And so sometime in the future, we hope to be able to do that.
Okay.
Another thing that is a bit of a challenge is multiple layers of clouds. You know, you can only see so far through a thick cloud.
Okay.
And if it's thick enough, sometimes you can't see a layer of icing that's below there.
Right.
But even besides those caveats, this product has a lot of potential to help out Alaskan aviators here.
Well, it sounds like a really big deal, and something that forecasters at the Alaska Aviation Weather Unit could use probably on a daily basis, and especially in the middle of a really big storm.
Yeah, I would think so.
Do you have a really good success story in the lower 48 using this tool?
You know, it's a fairly new product, and so we're still evaluating it. But yeah, we have had a lot of cases where we have seen that it does tend to capture those icing conditions.
Okay, very good. Well, Amanda, thanks so much for sharing some of the very interesting satellite imagery and the tools that you're using there at the Aviation Weather Center in Kansas City with us here in Alaska. People can probably find some of this information online, right?
Yeah, here is a website here. It's a page from NASA Langley, and they have this imagery as well as a bunch of other satellite imagery that you can take a look at.
Okay, great. And I'm sure our friends at the Alaska Aviation Weather Center and the unit will be using that in the coming months there with your training and your help there to learn more about that tool to help Alaska aviators any day of the year. That's wonderful stuff. So thanks again for joining us, Amanda, and we welcome you to view any of our Alaska weather facts on YouTube anytime at the address below, and we'll see you next time. And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Well, we conclude our show with the marine weather segment and looking at the sea ice edge. The ice continues to melt rapidly throughout the Norton Sound area and areas surrounding St. Lawrence Island up through the Bering Strait. And that trend will only continue here as we head into June. As we go up through the Bering Strait, lower Chukchi Sea, we see the ice continuing to melt off, areas beginning to open up. Still some shore-fast ice there. As we go through Kotzebue Sound and up along the northwest coast, Cape Lisborne up toward Utqiagvik. But again, we expect the ice to continue to melt and break up there through the lower Chukchi Sea in the days and weeks ahead. Throughout the southeast panhandle, winds will be out of the north, 15 to 20 knots in the inner channels, especially Lynn Canal, upwards to 20 knots, 4-foot waves. Southerly winds down on the south end, Ketchikan, Metlakatla. South winds 10 knots, waves 3 feet. Otherwise, northwest winds 15 to 20 knots along the outer coast with waves running about 4 to 5 feet. For Saturday, we will see, with those northerly winds, rather sunnier conditions across the northern central panhandle, along with warming temperatures. Inner channels, winds out of the north, 10, 20 knots, waves 2 to as high as 3, 4 feet there in Lynn Canal. And then down along the outer coast of the Gulf, we anticipate winds out of the northwest about 15 knots and waves running generally around 5 feet. Northwest Gulf, winds will be variable around 10 knots, waves just a few feet. Northwesterly winds 10 knots in Prince William Sound, waves a couple of feet there. And as we go down along the length of Cook Inlet, we expect winds to be out of the north to northwest at 10 to 15 knots, waves 2 to 3 feet. On Saturday, it's going to be a warm one there throughout surrounding Cook Inlet. Winds will remain variable over the northwest Gulf Coast, only around 10 knots with waves 4 or 5 feet. West winds 10 knots there in Prince William Sound, just a couple of foot waves. And then up through Cook Inlet, we expect winds to be out of the west-southwest around 10 to maybe as high as 15 knots and waves generally 2 to 3 feet at best. Across Kodiak Island, variable winds 10 knots there, Shelikof Strait. Otherwise, look for west to northwest winds 15 to maybe as high as 20 knots there south of Kodiak. Otherwise, waves running 3-4 feet on the North Pacific side, 2 to 3 feet on the Bering side. On Saturday, winds will be southwesterly in the vicinity of Kodiak Island, 15 to 20 knots, waves 3 to 6 feet. On the Bering side, winds turn on the west and north there, 10 to 15 knots, waves 2 to 3 feet as well. And on Friday, the Aleutians, we have that big high centered up over the central Bering, and the counterclockwise, clockwise circulation that we have with that is keeping winds out of the northeast across the eastern half of the Aleutians, 15 to 20 knots, waves 4 to 6 feet on the North Pacific side and 3 to 4 feet on the Bering side. The high continues to remain anchored there kind of between St. Paul and St. Matthew, and so the winds continue out of the northeast around 15 knots across the central and eastern Aleutians, with waves of 5 to 6 feet on the North Pacific side and 3 to 4 feet on the Bering side. Along the southwest coast, there will be areas of low cloudiness and fog with that high in place, the subsidence inversion keeping those lower clouds locked in place. Winds somewhat variable, 10 to 15 knots, maybe as high as 20 knots there, just offshore of the lower Yukon Delta, as well as areas further west of Togiak. But up through Norton Sound, winds will be out of the west, 10 knots, not just Friday, but into Saturday. And elsewhere, circulating around that high, we see offshore winds generally out of the west-northwest, 15 to 20 knots. As we pass up through the Bering Strait and lower Chukchi Sea, winds will be southwest to south, 20 knots, but then fall off to 5 to 10 knots, especially once you get north of Point Hope and along the northwest Arctic coast. Strongest winds along the eastern Arctic coast will be in the vicinity of Kaktovik, maybe easterly as high as 25 knots, but then winds really fall off on Saturday. Only around 5 knots along the Arctic coast with ice still in place. The lower Chukchi Sea will see variable winds around 10 knots and waves where there is some open water generally running just a foot or two. Quick check of the Friday weather map. Big high pressure centered over the central Bering, extending out into the North Pacific south of the Gulf. And then on Saturday, not much change. That high in the mid-levels of the atmosphere will build eastward, bringing temperatures in the 70s to areas of the southwest up through south central surrounding Cook Inlet.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.